Okay, we're on the third shiur here on different sugyas in Vayol Moshe, and we're going to start a new thing now. Rav Ovadya Yosef's tshuva on giving back the conquered West Bank territories. So this is printed in Tchumen. This is not in any of his own Sfarim, Yabiya Omer and Chavadas and these kind of Sfarim. It's in a journal called Tchumen. It's in Tchumen, Krach Yud, Amud 34, volume 10, page 34. And the footnote says that originally it was said as a lecture in Mosad Rav Kook in the year Tafshin Mem Tes, 1989, and then it was printed in the Yated, Naaman, and in Shirashim, and now it's printed in Tchumen, together with additions written by Rav Ovadya Yosef himself. So this is based on a lecture that he gave, but it was annotated and completed by him in print. And again, it's Tchumen, volume 10, page 34. Okay, so it starts out with some words about, I didn't print the whole thing here because we're not going to go through that part, but he just speaks about that all his words are only conditioned on the fact that the experts, military experts, would say that it will lead to peace if you give back territories, and it will lead to saving lives. So he says now like this: Isser lo yisechanim b'mesiras shtachim la'aravim. The Isser of lo yisechanim. So here he's going to discuss the Isser of actually lo yeshvu and lo yisechanim. Two Isserim in the Torah. Because that's how a Poisek thinks. He has to think, what aveir could it be? After all, the Medina, he's not as, I guess, I don't know how to categorize him, but forget about Zionism for a second. Let's talk about, let's say you have Eretz Yisrael and you want to give it back. Let's forget about the Shalosh Shvuos, forget about all the Stugias. Pashut, you have Eretz Yisrael and you want to give it back. So what aveir could it be? What aveir could you be doing by giving it back? So, two things come to mind. Lo yeshvu, the Torah says, Lo yeshvu b'artzecha, the goyim aren't allowed to live in your land. And lo yisechanim, which is don't sell even land to a guy in Eretz Yisrael. So let's think. First of all, lo yeshvu b'artzecha. What's the isser? Here you're going to give back the West Bank. So who lives in the West Bank now? Certain parts of it have Yidden in it, right? So they have Kiryas Sefer and Beitar and different cities where Jews live. If you're going to give those back, obviously the Jews are going to have to get up and leave, because they weren't talking about giving back the land and having the Jews continue living there under a Palestinian state. That wasn't the Havamina. The Havamina of the Oslo Accords or whatever it is that they should give it back and it will become totally Palestinian, which means all the Jews have to get up and leave, and Arabs are going to come live in the same place where they lived, right? So if that's the case, then you have the Isser of Lo Yeshvu B'Artzecha. They're not going. The Torah says that Goyim should not live in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so let's see. V'hinei be'etzem din hachzars shtachim me'Eretz Yisrael shaloi b'makom pikuch nefesh. If it would not be pikuch nefesh, means all aveiros in the Torah are mutter to save a life, except for the Gimel aveiros chamuras. So giving back land is mutter to save lives, even if it is an aveira. But let's assume for a second that it wouldn't be pikuch nefesh either way. It wouldn't cause any life to be lost if you give it back, and it won't cause any life to be lost if you don't give it back. So then what happens? Then you have to deal with the Isser of lo yisechanim and lo yeshvu. So he says like this: Midivrei Rambam, Hilchos Avodah Zarah Yud Vav Shekasav. The Rambam says like this: V'miyad Yisrael tekifa ala umos. If the Jewish people are in power over the nations, meaning like in Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni times, Asr lanu lahaniach goy beinenu. We're not allowed to let a goy live among us. V'afilu yoshev yeshivas arai, even if he lives there temporarily, or he goes on a trip for his business and he just passes through. Lo yavor b'artzenu. He's not even allowed to pass through the land. Unless he accepts upon himself to keep the 7 mitzvahs of B'nai Noach. Shenemar lo yeshvu b'artzecha v'afilu l'fisha. He may not live in the land even temporarily. Okay? That's the Rambam. So Muchach, we see from the Rambam, she'isr zeh noi gam l'gabe yishmeelim, that the isr is for the Arabs too, the Muslims too. She'enam lo'ivdim avodah zarah. How do you see that? Because the Rambam doesn't mention that they have to be makabel not to do avodah zarah. He says they have to be makabel all 7 mitzvahs b'nei noach. And we're assuming now that the Yishmaelim, even though they don't do avodah zarah, but they still don't keep all the 7 mitzvahs b'nei noach. Okay? That's what we're assuming here. Now, in the bottom here, in the footnote, he has a raya to that. Here's what he says.
What does shtachem literally mean?
It means areas of land, territories. So he says, The Rambam is talking about Yain Nesach and Yain Stam Yenam, and he says, Ger Toishav Shekibel Alav Sheva Mitzvahs, Yenoi Oster B'Shtiya Mutter Ba'Noah. If a Ger Toishav, it's a guy who accepts upon himself the 7 mitzvahs, and so his wine is Oster B'Shtiya, because it's still Stam Yenam, but it's Mutter Ba'Noah, because we're not chosheh him of doing a nisach with the yain to make it aser. Okay? And then he says, V'chein goy she'eino oived avodah zarah. Similarly, any guy that doesn't do avodah zarah, k'goyin eilu ha'yishmelim, like the Muslims. Ye'enam aser b'shtiya mutter ba'anoah. Their wine is mutter to have enough from, because we're not chosheh them that they did avodah zarah. Okay?
That's able to have their wine?
What? Oh, what'd you say?
Well, they say you're allowed to have their wine.
You're not allowed to drink it, but you're allowed to have enough from it, meaning you're allowed to sell it.
Me by Christians, no?
Christians not, right. You're saying the wine of Christians will be Oster Ba'Anoah. The wine of a Muslim will be Mutter Ba'Anoah.
Well, they don't drink wine anyways.
Yeah, I know, that's true. But theoretically, if a Muslim would touch wine, he doesn't have to drink it, right? If he touches it, a guy touches wine, it becomes Oster Ba'Anoah, right? So here, the guy, let's say a Muslim touches wine, picks up the bottle, swishes it around, you're allowed to sell that wine, you're just not allowed to drink it.
And it's referring to wine, not like beer or something.
Yeah, only wine.
I think the Turks drink this liquor called Iraqi.
Okay, maybe.
And they're like Arak also, but that's...
Yeah, but I think Muslims are really not allowed to have any alcoholic. Anyway, the point is, he's B'daik from the Rambam here. The Rambam says Yishmaelim separate from the Ger Toishav Shekibel Alav Sheva Mitzvahs. So it's mashma from the Rambam that the Yishmaelim are not Makabel Sheva Mitzvahs. Okay? That's what he's trying to be Medaik. So let's go back to the top now. So what he says, the Rambam says that you're not allowed to let a guy live in Eretz Yisrael unless he's Makabel Sheva Mitzvahs. He means that even the Yishmaelim who are not Makabel all 7 mitzvahs are not allowed to live there. Okay. Ulam. Haravid b'hasagoisav sham kasav. The Ravid, when he's disagreeing with this Rambam, he says, V'zois lo shamanu me'olam. He says, this we never heard, that it should be also for a guy to live in Eretz Yisrael. V'hapasik shehu mevi b'sheva umoisu. The pasuk that the Rambam brings is not talking about any guy, it's only talking about the 7 nations, the Canaanim. V'afil lidvarav, Yeshiva ksiv ba v'lo yavar. And his second kasha is, even if the Rambam would be correct that it means all nations of the world, not just the 7 nations, but it's only yeshiva, lo yeshvu, but v'lo yavar, they can't travel, that it never says. Okay? V'chein kasav asmag, ayin sham, uv'gittin tanya, mem hei amad aleph, lo yeshvu bi'artzcha pen yachatiu oischa li. It says they shall not live in your land because lest they make you sin to me. So the Gemara says, you might think that this is talking about a guy that was makabel on himself not to do avodah zarah, and such a guy would be also to live in the land. Do not return a slave to his master. Okay? Meaning the slave runs away from Chutz La'aretz, and he runs to Eretz Yisrael, and he's running away from a master, a goyish master, okay, in Chutz La'aretz, and he wants to run to Eretz Yisrael. Don't return him to his master. because when he returned to his master, you're going to make him do avodah zarah. And here he wants to come to Eretz Yisrael and be free from avodah zarah. So my takon asoi, what should you do? Let him live among you and not do avodah zarah. So zetman that you see that a guy who wants to live in Eretz Yisrael not do avodah zarah is allowed. Pirsh Rashi, lo yeshvu b'yartzecha b'sheva u'mois ksiv. Rashi says lo yeshvu b'yartzecha is talking about the 7 nations, like the Ravid. Lo yisaskir eved al adoinav, don't return a slave to his master. Rashi says al toitziyuhu mi beinechem la'ashiv ila avodah zarah. That the word of a slave, why don't you return a slave to his master? Because you're returning him to Chutz La'aretz to do avodah zarah, and rather let him stay in Eretz Yisrael and not do avodah zarah. Okay, one more thing before we go to the Vayel Moshe. V'Aramban b'soif Parsha Shoftim Dvarim Chaf Yud Ches Kasav. The Ramban says Laman Asher Lo Yilamdu Eschem Lasois Kechol Toya Voisam, that they should not teach you to do all their abominations. In other words, the reason why you have to kill the 7 nations or expel the 7 nations is Laman Asher Lo Yilamdu Eschem Lasois. They shouldn't teach you to do what they do. Hine HaTorah Hizhira Oisanu Lo Yeshvu B'Artzecha. The Torah commands us, don't let them live in your land. Pen Yachtiu Oischali Kisa Avodas Elohehem, because he'll come to do avodah zarah. Shehi Azhar Lo Evdei Avodah Zarah. Ki Im Tichrois Lehem Lehem Bris V'Rabim Mehem Yifatucha Avodah Zarah. They will convince you to do it. So therefore, it's totally an avodah zarah. Yeah. One more thing. So basically, what he's showing is that all these poskim, except for the Rambam, all these Rishonim, Rashi, the Ramban, the Smag, the Ravid, they all hold that the Isser is only by the 7 nations, and furthermore, they say the Isser is only when they're doing avodah zarah, but not when they're Yishmaelim. Okay, so according to this, it would be mutter to give back land to the Arabs because you're not being over on lo yeshvu, because the people who live there are not going to do avodah zarah. All right, that's Rav Ovadya Yosef. So let's take a look now in Vayel Moshe and see what he says about lo yeshvu b'artzecha. It's Yishuv Eretz Yisrael Siman Tes. Let's take a look. So it says, that the Ramban on Sefer Mitzvahs, the Ramban when he's talking about the Mitzvahs Aseh of living in Eretz Yisrael, so that Ramban, he says that one of the rayas that there's a Mitzvah Aseh of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is because you see that Yoshua fought a war to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and David HaMelech fought wars to conquer Eretz Yisrael. And David was criticized because he fought a war to conquer Aram Soiva before he finished conquering Eretz Yisrael. So you see that there's a mitzvah to conquer Eretz Yisrael. That's the Ramban's Ramban.
Your book in last week, Matas Maseh, quotes this Ramban.
Yeah, in Echanami, yeah. Umasha hevi yoy Ramban b'divrei Chazal b'kibush Yoshua v'David gam b'zeh shapri yesh loymar. He says, what are you going to answer according to the Rambam and Rashi? The Rambam holds that there's no mitzvah to conquer Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi holds to live in Eretz Yisrael, and also Rashi holds like that. Rashi holds it's only v'yashavtem ba is only a promise; it's not a chiyuv. So according to them, what are they going to do with the Ramban's raya? So he says, "Bozeh shapri yesh loymar the sabri Rashi v'Rambam b'siyasta she'ein mizeh raya v'yashavtem ba shehi mitzvah saseh." It's not a proof. Why not? Va'ayin b'tshuvas rivash siman kuf aleph. The Rivash holds like the Ramban. He holds it's a mitzvah, but the Rivash doesn't accept every possible proof to this. He says like this: He says the one writing the letter to the Rivash made a kal v'chomer. The Rivash's tshuva is about someone who wants to leave on Shabbos or travel on Shabbos to get there to Israel. Can you be Mechal Shabbos? Not obviously not to get on the boat on Shabbos, but let's say you get on the boat Erev Shabbos in order to go there to Israel. Okay? I think that's what he's talking about. So he says like this: he says, the Gemara says, when you buy a field in Eretz Yisrael, that you write a star on it, they write the star on Shabbos. Not that the Yid writes, but he tells the Goy, and the Goy writes on Shabbos. They were matir, amir la'akum, for the sake of living in Eretz Yisrael. V'yamar she'akoyna karka shehi sham mitzvah kala l'gabe ho'aliyah. Yeah, so this person writing, he says, kal v'chomer, if they were matir even for a mitzvah kala, which is buying land, a small mitzvah, so aliyah, going to Eretz Yisrael, which is a big mitzvah, then kol shekain they should be matir amir la'akum, and other things that have to do with Shabbos. Maybe not actually being Mechal Shabbos, but to let's say to travel on Friday, and when you know you're going to be Mechal Shabbos in the middle of the trip, whatever. So he says, Loi diber nechayna bazeh. The Rivash says it's not correct. Why not? The Adrabah, hakoyna sada min ha'akum, he mitzvah gedoyla min ha'aliyah. Adrabah, to buy a field from a guy is a bigger mitzvah than aliyah l'Eretz Yisrael. Let's say you were going to buy a field from a guy in Eretz Yisrael, but you're not going to go. You're just going to buy a field and stay sitting over here. So he says that's a bigger mitzvah than aliyah. Ki ho'aliyah he mitzvah l'shaita, a mitzvah that's only for now. Uliatzmoi levad, it's only for yourself. You're going to go there and live there, but it's only you. So v'loi uliatzmoi levad v'loi natir ba shvus bein b'maisa b'yadayim bein b'amir l'nachri. We're not matir in a derabbanan on Shabbos for the sake of yourself living there. Avol yishuv Eretz Yisrael, but to live in Eretz Yisrael. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, it's a mitzvah forever. It's for the whole Jewish people. Why? Because you're preventing the land, the Holy Land, from falling into the hands of the Tmeim. We can't learn out from that to all other mitzvahs. The Ramban himself says it. I don't know where. So Mavur Bozeh, we see from the Rivash, Liknois Bais Beretz Yisrael, Yan Shemesalik Akum Misham, you're getting the Avodah Zarah person out of there. Zu mitzvah gedoyel yoyster me aliyah l'Eretz Yisrael. It's a bigger mitzvah. Ve'en l'meidim mikinyan bais lahatir ister d'Rabbanan b'shvil aliyah l'Eretz Yisrael. We're not going to be matir ister d'Rabbanan for the sake of aliyah. Okay. Look a little ahead, see where he speaks about lois chanim and lo yeshvu. Yeah, turn the page, paragraph Omnam advarim pshutim ubruim shelasalik o akum eretz Yisrael achiv milav mefurish b'kra lo yeshvu b'yartzecha pen yachtiu eischali. Okay, that there's a law in the Torah that everybody agrees to, even the Rambam, Rashi, everybody else agrees that this is the law. By Yeshivas Eretz Yisrael to Machlokes, right? The Ramban says there's a mitzvah, and the others disagree. But by Lo Yeshvu, everybody agrees. He says, "V'chasav Rambam Zal, Perek Yud Mehilchas Avodah Zarah Halacha Vav, Shebizman Sheyad Yisrael Tekifa Asur Lanu Laniach Oivdei Kechavim Beinenu. V'chasav Sham Shafilu LeYeshivas Arai Oilavor Mimakam Makam Asur Lanicham B'Shvil Alav Lo Yeshvu B'Yartzcha Shu Afilu Lefi Shah." That's this Rambam that Rav Ovadya also brought down. The Gemara says that you're not allowed to sell or even rent houses to a guy. The Kol Shekain Sadais, and it says Kol Shekain to rent them a field. The East Bay Tarti, because the field has more problems. Besides the fact that you're letting him live there, he says Mishum Isser Chaniya, letting him live there, Umishum the Mafkalei Mitzvahs, and also the field is going to be, things are going to grow in the field, right? You're going to have Trumas and Meisters, and if you sell it to a guy, it's not going to have Trumas and Meisters. The Isser Chaniya, who milav the Lois Chanim. The Isser Chaniya is learned out from Lois Chanim. Aval Yoiser Mevur Ho Isser Shaloi Laniach Akum Be'eretz Yisrael Af HaYoishvi Mikvar Hu milav the Lo Yeshvu B'Yartzecha. So that's more mefurish. The Lois Chanim is a drush of Chazal, but this is more mefurish. It says Lo Yeshvu B'Yartzecha K'Mevur B'Rambam U'B'Shar Mo'enei HaMitzvahs. Okay, so therefore, that's a unanimous halacha. What are you going to tell me? Maybe from that you're going to learn out that the Ramban is correct, that there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. He says no. These things are two totally separate subjects. Even if the Torah is just promising us that we can live in Eretz Yisrael, since there's a lot of important things in Eretz Yisrael, so therefore the Torah was very particular that Goyim should not live there. Why? That they shouldn't cause the Jews to sin. So it doesn't mean that there's a chiv to live there, but once you're living there, make sure there's no Goyim there. Even though the Ramban is trying to bring proof to that, the Torah lahavi psukim ma'amor Chazal al ze lo yehevi klal mihach krad lo yeshvu b'yartzecha. He doesn't bring this pasuk down. Mimnei shemashi yisir Torah kedosha shelo laniach sham akum ein raya klal sheyesh mitzvah saseh v'vi yeshavtem ba k'moish nispara. There's no proof from that there's a mitzvah saseh. Mi'ata lefi zeh ein emuv mashe v'yar Ramban raya v'yeshavtem ba havi mitzvah me'akibush v'mei Yoshua uv'mei David. That the kasha is now that how could the Ramban bring a raya from Yeshua and David? Sha'amru zal shemitzvah lichpoi sha'aretz b'dei akum ve'ashimu es David ma'shekavish chutz l'aretz terem shekavish es ha'aretz v'niach akum be'eretz Yisrael halo izeh achiv l'salik akum min ha'aretz hu milav mefurish lo yeshvu b'yartzecha. He says, how could you bring a raya from that to Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? Right? That's not because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, it's because of getting Goyim out of Eretz Yisrael. Ve'ein mizeh raya klal al mitzvah saseh v'yishavtem b'akam. Okay? So basically, he's saying there is a mitzvah of lo yeshvu, and the Ramban brings a raya from the conquest that Yoshua and David made, that there's a mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. How could you say that? How could the Ramban say that, right? Maybe the reason why David was supposed to conquer it was in order to be Mekayim lo yeshvu b'yartzecha. Okay? So now, Siman Yud. Ve'ef shaloymar, he could say, V'hinei das harayvid, shaloy nemar lav zeh lo yeshvu b'yartzecha ela al zayin umois. The Ravid says that this is only talking about the 7 nations. V'lo al shar akum, not regarding all Goyim in the world. Okay? And basically, if you don't, just to give up a preview, what he's going to say is that the Ramban is like the Ravid. The Ramban also holds that it's only on the 7 nations. So in the time of Yeshua, in the Chanami, he was getting the 7 nations out of Eretz Yisrael. That's not a raya. The raya really is from David, because by David's time, the 7 nations were all gone. So what nations lived in Eretz Yisrael? Other nations, other Goyim. So why did David have to conquer them? Why do you have to conquer them? They were not the Shiva Amamin. Elamai, you see, there must be because Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael. Yeah? So that's the Ramban's raya. That's what he's going to say. Let's take a look. So he says, Ef shalom dinei daser raivet shaloy nemar lav zeh lo yesh v'b'yartzech al zayin umois v'lo al shar akum el daser Rambam he. It's only the Rambam the kiven dekasa b'kra tam pen yachatiu aischali, that they might make you sin to me. Lachen yalfina minei gam l'shar akum. We learn out that it applies to all nations, even though it doesn't say. It only is talking about the Shiva Amamin, but the Rambam learns that you go after the reason. If the reason is that they might make you sin, then it applies to everybody. The Lashon ha-Rebbe Elazar mimitz b'Sefer Yireim Siman Pevav the Kai Lav Zeh Shaloi Yanichu Lasheves Anashim Rishayim Umachtiei Adam Be'eretz Yisrael. That has nothing to do with the 7 nations. It's anybody who is Rishayim who would cause people to sin. You can't let stay in Eretz Yisrael. The Afal Pisho Inyan Medaber Mizayin Umois Mikamakam Kibin to Ksiv Pen Yachtiu Eischali Lamadnu Shariba Kol Amachtim Yurin Sham. This includes all the people who lead people to sin. So you see an even bigger chiddush. Here the Rambam says any guy is included, but the Sefer Yereim says he doesn't mention the word guy at all. He just says any machtim, anybody who causes you to sin. So therefore, yeah, that even Jewish Rishayim are included. The Zionists are included in this. It's even more true of the Zionists. Because of the reason. They might cause you to sin. That reason applies more to Risha Yisrael. Why? Ki Risha Yisrael alulim yoister lahachti es Yisrael me Risha Akum. It's more likely that you're going to learn from what a Jew does than when you learn from a guy does.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your book with Haskell something in Hungary. He asked, we're making schools for you. He said, because we're not going to... He will respect the teacher, but the non-Jewish teaching won't learn from him.
Oh, you mean that's why they went to the public schools in Hungary? Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe
in the rebbe, in the biography?
No, in the Footsteps of the Flock.
Footsteps of the Flock, yeah. Okay. All right. So it's more likely to learn from Rishayim. The Brisker Rav said it says in the Gemara that. It says Lo'olam Yadar Adam Beretz Yisrael Afilu Be'ir Sheruba Akum. Okay, you should live in a city that's even Ruba Akum. So Mr. Rav said, Ruba Akum, but not Ruba Kaifrim.
Right, you mentioned that.
Yeah. So.
And I read in the book in Russia also when the Bolsheviks took over, they set up these Yiddish language atheist schools. And the front parents would send them to the Geisha schools. They considered that to be less evil than the Yiddish language. Because in the Yiddish language school, they would focus on Judaism.
And make fun of it, I guess.
But in the Russian, the Geisha schools, they would just say all religions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So therefore, Risha Yisrael, Alulim Yoiser, Lach, Tahachti Yisrael, Me Risha Akum. Kamash Kosav Rambam Zal. Prepare good milchas akum. The mishum hachi who apikorsim Yisrael gruim me'akum. A Jewish apikoris is worse than an akum. Why? Bishvil shem besirim esa'am me'achrei Hashem. Because they caused the Jews to go astray from Hashem. V'nira degama Rambam. So therefore, the Sefer Yereim would say that someone who's an apikoris is not allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael, and it would be a mitzvah to buy his house and to get him out of there. Even the Rambam who says that not to let a guy live in Eretz Yisrael, he goes after the Tam. He's not looking at the 7 nations as a race. He's looking at the Tam. Also, time of the Kra, the Omer Pen Yakti Oischa, Savri Kedasta Sefer Yereim. So he would also agree to the Sefer Yereim. The Koy Al Kol Machtim goes in anybody who will make you sin. The Zil Basar Taima. Okay, Umad Darshin and Bazet time of the Kra, Af Oisin Astoivrim Loy Darshin and time of the Kra. Even the Rabbanan of Reb Shimon in the Gemara who hold that we don't darshan time of the Kra, even they will agree that we darshan time of the Kra in this case. Yisbar la Halan. This will be explained later. Umashlo Hiski Rambam El Akum. Either Rambam only mentions Goyim. Who al derech shekasav Rambam zal perek yud alaf milchus edus halacha yud the mishum hachi lo yitzricha cham limnoi so apikorsim ve'amumrim b'chlal psulei edus. He says that why didn't the Chachamim say when they listed the people who were apostle edus? Why didn't they say apikorsim? He says kivan she'elu amordim v'akoifrim pchusim heim mino akum. They're worse than goyim. So therefore, ein sarach limnoi sam. There's no need to mention beferish that they're apostle edus. Therefore, the Rambam didn't have to mention that lo yeshvu applies to koifrim. Hamachtim b'nei adam ki hem pchusim mino akum v'kol shekenu. Therefore, kol sheken it's true according to the Rambam. The Ravid has the other opinion The Ravid holds that's only the 7 nations. That's our learn the Savri, the Kivin, the Akrosh Sham, Meyer, Mizayin, Umois, Ein Raya Milav, the Lo Yeshvu, Biartzecha, the Koi, Gam, Al Shar, Umois, and Machtiyim. Doesn't go on anybody else who makes you sin. Kivin, the Zayin, Umois, Gri, Me'akoil. The 7 nations were worse. The Matzinu, the Kapi, the Leim, Lakasiv, Yoiser, Belav, the Loisachai, Kol Neshama. We find there's a special lav not to leave them alive. So, L'chein, Loisavri, Gam, Lav, Zeh, Ela, Al Zayin, Umois, the Alayu Kai. Therefore, they hold that this lav of lo yeshvu is only going on the zayin umois. V'hi plukta gedola bein kama rishonim ma'aracha mul ma'aracha ve'ein laharich bozekan. There's many rishonim on each side of this machlokes, and there's no need to list them all here. So what do you see here? You see, what's interesting is the way the rebbe is lining up the machlokes is a little different from the way Rav Ovadya Yosef is lining it up. The rebbe is lining it up what's the machlokes here? Think about it for a second. What's the machlokes, the Rambam and the Ravid? The Rambam holds it's all machtiyim. Look at the reason. And nothing to do with race. We're not racists here. We're not against the 7 nations. We're against anybody who's going to cause us to sin. Be they a goy or a yid. Anybody who could convince Jews to sin is not allowed to be in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah? That's the Rambam Shita. And the Shita of the Ravid is no, it is a race thing. It's the 7 nations, and that's it. Nothing else. So you can have another guy who does avodah zarah, but he's not from the 7 nations. He would be allowed to be there. Okay? He would be allowed to be there. Because it's nothing to do with pen yachti or chali is a tam, but we're not going to extrapolate based on that tam. It's only the 7 nations. But the way Rav Ovadya Yosef presents it, it looks a little different. It looks like he's presenting it that the Rambam Shita is that it's everybody, any guy, and even the Arabs, right? And the other Rishonim would hold no, not the Arabs. The other Rishonim would hold no, not the Arabs. That's not really the machlokes. Think about it for a second. The Rambam holds that it's not a race thing. It's a thing of pen yachtiu. They might cause you to sin. So if they're not going to cause you to sin, then you can leave them there. If they're Makabel Sheva Mitzvahs. Now he says the Arabs are not Makabel Sheva Mitzvahs. That's debatable. Question is if they're Makabel, do they have to be Makabel in front of a Bezdin? In the bottom he brings that the Yishmaelim are not similar to a Ger Toishav. Ger Toishav has a special din that he's Makabel in front of a Bezdin. So maybe the Yishmaelim are not a Ger Toishav. But at least they don't, maybe they don't do any of the 7 mitzvahs, and maybe they're not included in this lav. Mashen came the other Rishonim who hold that it's a race thing. So now, if they're from the 7 nations, then it's no good. But if they're from a different nation, then it is good. And the Yishmaelim are not from the 7 nations, so they're good. So l'chuli alma, they would be okay. The way Rav Ovadya Yosef is setting it up, it's a machlokes the Rambam and the other Rishonim. The other Rishonim are looking at avodah zarah as the problem, and the Rambam is looking at all goyim as the problem. He's making it like the opposite. He's making it that the Rambam looks at race. The Rambam looks at goyim. Goyim are bad, Yidden are good, and it doesn't matter what kind of goyim. And the other Rishonim look at avodah zarah. So there we could be mekel and Yishmaelim. I'm saying that it's the other way around. The Rambam is the one who looks at the actions of the person. So Yishmaeli, and a Muslim, is not included in it because he's not doing avodah zarah. Mashenk in other nations, or even a Jew who does avodah zarah, is aser or apikoros. And the other Rishonim are looking only at the race. They're looking at where they come from. So Vaiter, according to them, a Yishmaeli is not a problem because the Yishmaeli is not from that race. Now he brings a Ramban. What's interesting, Rav Ovadya Yosef brings this Ramban in Parshas Shoftim. He says, let's look at it one more time. It says about the 7 nations that you have to get rid of them because they shouldn't teach you to do Kichol Toya Voisam. Hinei HaTorah his hero Isanu lo yeshvu bi'artzecha pen yachtiu oischa li ki sa'avod es Elohehem shehi yazhara lo evdei avodah zarah. He says that it's because they do avodah zarah. The other Ramban, the Rebbe brings a different Ramban. Look back at Vayol Moshe now. He brings a different Ramban to prove that the Ramban is on the Ravid side. Because of b'mayin hachachma daf lamed hey amid beis ois samach ches Ma'ina Chachma is a sefer that goes on the mitzvahs of the Torah. He has like a poem where he makes it all rhyme. And the bottom he has like Mar Makoimis to back it up. So he says, the Nir Midas Ramban b'Parsha Shoftim, that the Ramban on Shoftim would hold like the Ravid. How do you know? Shehiksha al Pirsh Rashi b'Soita Mikra de lo yeshvu bi'artzecha. He asks on Rashi from this pasuk lo yeshvu bi'artzecha the Soiver Kedas Ravid the Koi Rak al Zayin Umais. That he goes only on the 7 nations. The Yavis Soiver the Koi Gal al Shar Umais lo Yav Maksha Midi Yuyin Sham. What does it say? It says that in Masechta Soita Daf Lamed Daled, I believe, there's a Gemara that says that when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, they wrote the Torah on stones. Mm-hmm. And why they do this in Parshas Kisavai. So why they write the Torah on stones? So that it says so that the nation should come and read it and keep the Torah, and they should be makabel the mitzvahs of the Torah. Maybe only the 7 mitzvahs, but they should be makabel. Yeah. So Rashi says, which nations is it talking about? It's not talking about the Shiva Amamin. It's not talking about the Canaanim. Why? Rashi says because the Canaanim, they don't get the chance to be Makabel the Torah. We don't want them in Eretz Yisrael no matter what, even if they're Makabel the Torah. So Elamai, who's it talking about? The Shar Umay So'ilam. Other people around the world could come and be Makabel 7 mitzvahs. But not the 7 nations of Canaan. And this is in consistency with Rashi's Shita on Chumash. Rashi on Chumash says, when it says, Kisik Rav Ha'ir, Li'ilachim Aleha V'karasa Ilel Shalom, yeah? That says when you come to a city to fight it, you first give them a chance to make Shalom, and you say, you want to stay, you can stay if you're Makabel certain things, not to do Avodah Zarah. Right? Rashi says, when's that talking? Only by Shar U'Masoilim, but not by the 7 nations. Why? Because Rashi holds the 7 nations is Lo Yisachai Kol Neshama, you can't let them live there, all, no matter what, whatever their Makabel doesn't help. Okay? That's Rashi. But the Ramban on Chumash disagrees with Rashi. Ramban says no. The 7 nations also have a chance to be Makabel the mitzvahs and stay in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? So the Ramban wants to argue on this Rashi. What does the Ramban say? Lo yeshvu bi'artzecha. He brings the pasuk Lo yeshvu bi'artzecha. So he's trying to show that Lo yeshvu bi'artzecha pen yachtiu oischali. The only reason why the 7 nations are not allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael is only pen yachtiu. But mashma that if they're not going to make you sin, they could live in Eretz Yisrael. That's the Ramban's raya against Rashi. And he says, but if the Ramban would hold like the Ravid, he holds like the Ravid, the Koi Rak al Zayin Umais, the Yavastoiver, like the Rambam, the Koi Gam Shar Umais, that pasuk Lo Yeshvu was going on the other nations, Lo Yavi Maksha Midi, he wouldn't be asking anything. Why not? Because if we're going on the other nations, then he could be saying like this: the other nations can't live in Eretz Yisrael because they might make you sin. But the Shiva Amamin, they, no matter what, they can't live in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? So he goes on, Lefizeh Ramban L'Shitasai. The Ramban L'Shitasai, since he holds like the Ravid, that it's going on only the 7 nations, therefore he brought a raya from David the Melech, like I said before, that David the Melech was conquering Eretz Yisrael. There were no 7 nations at that time, so therefore what? Why was David conquering it? Must be because of the Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's how he explains the Ramban. But what do I want to show you from this? I want to show you that he's not taking the approach that Rav Ovadya Yosef took. Rav Ovadya Yosef's approach with the Ramban is the Ramban holds that it's only looking at the reason. Lo yeshvu bi'artzecha pen yachtiu oischali. It's only looking at the reason. But if they're Yishmaelim, they're Arabs, they're Muslims, you can let them live there, right? What I want to show you is the Ramban, from the way the rebbe is learning it up. It's not the reason. It's not because of pen yachtiu. It's really because of the 7 nations. Now, the Ramban does go a step further. He says even the 7 nations could be allowed to stay if they're makabel the mitzvahs. So really, it's both. Really, it's both. The Ramban is really the most makel in letting Goyim stay in Eretz Yisrael, because he's letting, first of all, any nation that's not from the Shiva Amamin period can stay. And even the Shiva Amamin, if they're Makabel mitzvahs, could also stay. So really the Ramban is the most makel in this Inyan.
You mean about letting the Goyim live there?
Yeah. So what's ironic about it is the Ramban, who is the head Shita, the Rosh Machmirim about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, right? He's the one who says the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, but he's also the most makel in letting Goyim stay in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, that's what Rav Ovadya Yosef brings.
Yeah, well, he brings it, but not to the extent that the Rebbe brings it. He's bringing it.
So the Rebbe brings it more.
Yeah, basically, Rav Ovadya Yosef is bringing that the Ramban says that any guy who doesn't do avodah zarah is allowed to stay, like the Muslims. But he's saying not only that, even a guy who does do avodah zarah, as long as he's not from the 7 nations, is allowed to stay.
That's from Ramban.
The Rebbe brings that from the Ramban, and he's saying, therefore, that's how he answers up the Ramban with David HaMelech. That what's the Ramban's raya? Ramban brings a raya from David HaMelech conquering Eretz Yisrael that there must be a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. That's why it was a mitzvah to conquer it. What do you mean? It's the 7 nations. The answer is no. There are no 7 nations left in David's time. It's other people, right? And those other people, what were they doing? They weren't tzaddikim. They weren't doing serving Hashem. They were doing avodah zarah, right? Wherever they were Moavim or Plishtim. Wherever they worshipped avodah zarah. So the Plishtim, right? The Plishtim had avodah zarah. It's famous in the Pesukim that they had. They had Dagon. So if the nations in the time of David HaMelech did avodah zarah, and David wiped them out, or he conquered them, right? So why did he do that? Must be because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. It can't be because of Lo Yeshvu. Why? Because Lo Yeshvu doesn't apply to that. You see, the Ramban is going very far with Lo Yeshvu. He's saying Lo Yeshvu does not apply to any guy except from the 7 nations. Any guy, even avodah zarah. Even if they do avodah zarah, it's allowed to let them live in Eretz Yisrael. So basically, the Ramban, if you're going to be stark about this Ramban, say, oh yeah, the Ramban holds Yishuv Eretz Yisrael to a mitzvah, but on the other hand, the very same Ramban holds that you can let any guy stay in Eretz Yisrael, no matter what he's makabel. So, even more, Rav Ovadya Yosef said it, but I'm saying it's even more extreme than him. I'm saying that even a guy that does avodah zarah, let's say you have these Christian Palestinians also, right? Mm-hmm. And they want to live in Beitar after the Jews leave. Well, that would also be mutter.
According to
the Ramban, not the Rambam, but the Ramban. Yeah.
Rambam?
Not the Rambam, but the Ramban.
Ramban, yeah.
The Rambam would hold no, because the Rambam holds any guy that does avodah zarah, even a yid, even a apikoros, like Netanyahu, even him, he's not allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael according to the Rambam. Rambam, yeah.
Oh, it says that's according to everybody.
Well, only the Rambam, because the Rambam is the one who goes buster the reason. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the reason, yeah, the reason applies to Zionists too. But if you look at the actual pasuk, the Ramban and the Raiva look at the actual pasuk, which is going on the 7 nations, they would say it's.
So the Goyim who over there, is allowed to stay there, but the Zionists are not.
No, I'm saying it's totally in the machlokes. I'm saying if you hold like the Rambam, that it goes on anybody who does avodah zarah, so then those Goyim are not allowed to stay. But who are then the Zionists are not allowed to stay. Mm-hmm. But it's all really
But the Ramban
academic.
says only the Goyim are allowed to stay.
The Ramban says only the 7 nations are not allowed to stay. But any guy that's not from the 7 nations is allowed to stay.
Even if they worship Rebbe.
Yeah.
So he's saying everyone is allowed, all the Goyim are allowed to stay there today.
Yeah.
And he's also saying that the Zionists are not allowed to?
Well, this thing that the Zionists are not allowed is only in the Rambam Shita. In the Ramban Shita,
Rabbi Shapiro also mentions it in his shir.
Yeah.
He says Netanyahu wouldn't be allowed to stay.
Yeah,
so he's quoting Rambam?
But that's going in the Rambam, yeah. That's what the Rebbe here says, B'Shem the Rambam, and
so
then
we
pick
and choose, we like what the Rambam has to say for this, but yeah.
He's just making a point. He's saying that if you want to bring this Rambam, the Zionists bring the Rambam.
So what does the Satmar Rebbe say on this sheet about the Apikoros?
Well, he just saw it. He says in Siman Yud here, he says that if we hold like the Rambam, the Zionists like to bring this Rambam. I've had letters from people. I have a settler who once wrote to me. He wrote this. He quoted me this Rambam. Right? When you bring this Rambam, you have to realize the Rambam is not saying.
So you send him back. this part?
I guess. I don't know. I don't know if we went into it. Because really it's academic today, because today it's not Yad Yisrael Tekifa. It's not supposed to be Yad Yisrael Tekifa. There's not supposed to be a Jewish state at all. So you're not supposed to be in power to decide who should live there and who should not live there. It's not even up to us. So it's really an academic question. But if there would really be a Jewish state today, we wouldn't let the Apikosim live there either. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to what we're doing here. Let's see. Yeah, next paragraph in this tshuva from Rav Ovadya. He said like this: Ela shemidivrei Rebbe Lezer mimitz b'sefer yirei mashalim loy mashma kain. That's what the Rebbe also quoted, that Rebbe Lezer mimitz holds like the Rambam. V'ayin l'maran achida b'shalas shuvas Chaim Shal u'b'shalas shuvas Maram Shik b'shalas shuvas Avnei Nezer v'doig. Al kapanim ladas roiv rishonim. Most rishonim ister loy yeshvu b'yatzacha eino noig l'gabe yishmeelim she'eino moivdim avodah zarah u'chol hadeis bizman hazeh. He says, now, according to all opinions, she'ein Yad Yisrael tekifa ala umais. He says, today, we don't have power. There's a state of Israel. He says, no, we don't have power l'garish es hagoyim me'eretz Yisrael me'iras umais. We're not going to expel anyone, even if the din would theoretically be that we have to expel them. We're not going to do it. Me'iras umais, because we're afraid of the nations around the world, the UN, whatever. What are they going to say? So, therefore, this din cannot apply. The Rambam himself says it's only when Yad Yisrael Tekifa.
Oh. I mean, Yad Yisrael Tekifa when the Mashiach comes or something?
Exactly, yeah. He says, look, the Rambam, just look at the second paragraph at the top. V'im Yad Yisrael Tekifa al ha'umais.
So even Rambam is saying everyone is allowed to stay there now?
Yeah, because the Rambam is saying it's only at a time when they're in power.
So he's saying everyone who worships Avodah Zarah is allowed to stay there, but he's also saying the Zionists, the Apikos, are not allowed to stay there.
No, well, the Rambam is saying if Yad Yisrael is Tekifa al ha'umais, then nobody who does Avodah Zarah or an Apikos is allowed to stay there. But today's times can't be called Yad Yisrael Tekifa. Rav Ovadya is arguing today's times, even if you're going to agree with the state, which we don't agree with it, but even if you do agree with it, it's not called Yad Yisrael Tekifa because we have to listen to the UN, the international law, right?
That's what Ovadya Yosef is saying?
Yeah. That's what
Dina de Malchus Adina applies.
Well, it's not Dina de Malchus Adina. He's saying the Metzias, for whatever reason, is that we can't do it. If the state of Israel would start expelling people, they'd get in big trouble.
So that means
they already are in big trouble. So think about the Human Rights Commission, what they would say about that, right?
Unfortunately, that's not.
So he says, "Bevada she'enu noig din zeh u'kumasha kasav Rambam sham ve'oid she'afilu hagoyim shehem oivdei avodah zarah shoich nimeneim." Even in Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to, forget about Arabs, but even the goyim who do avodah zarah. There's no possibility of getting them out of there. This is a Zionist type word, bein leumi, but it means like in international law. The international law requires them to protect the churches. Even though there's a mitzvah to go and get rid of all avodah zarah, and to search after it, and we should at least conquer it and have it under our control. So he says, therefore, the kibush that was done by the Israeli army is not really kibush, because he's saying they don't really have power to do anything about it. So therefore, the fact that they rule over it means nothing la halacha, because they can't really enforce the halacha.
So is this a rejection of the aschata tegula, rishis michas gula? Say no.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what he says about that. But what he's saying about he's just saying from a halachic standpoint, the state of Israel can't be considered Yad Yisrael Tekifa because we don't have the power to get rid of avodah zarah. And therefore all these halachas don't apply today. So then you're going to tell me, don't give back the territories because you're going to let Arabs live there, and the Rambam holds the Goyim can't live in Eretz Yisrael. Well, he's saying, what are you gaining? So then what? What do you want to do? Rav Ovadya is saying to the Zionists, what do you want to do? You want to hold on to it? You're going to hold on to it. You're weiter not being Mekayim the mitzvah of Lo Yeshvu B'Artzecha. So what are you gaining by holding on to it? You're not Yad Yisrael Tekifa anyway. So the Isser doesn't apply today. This is what he says. Now what's interesting about this is how he approaches it. He doesn't say you're not allowed to have a state. What he should have said is, if you can't be Mekayim the mitzvah of getting rid of Avodah Zarah, then you're not allowed to conquer it in the first place. The Rebbe has in Maimer Shal Shvuos, I'm not going to go through it, but it's in Siman, Tzadik Hey, just for example, Tzadik Hey, Hayotze lanu mizeh sha'koivshim Eretz Yisrael im ho avodah zarah shebesoicha. Those who conquer Eretz Yisrael with the avodah zarah in it. Turn one more page. There.
This is Tzadik Ches?
Tzadik Hey, I think. Oh no, you're right. It's Tzadik Ches. It just got a little smudged. They rule over the churches and they don't get rid of them. They are considered like they're doing avodah zarah. Okay, and then let's see what else. He says in Siman Tzadik, turn back a few pages. Rinei Loshna Rambam Perek Zayin Hilchos Akum Halacha Aleph Mitzvahs Hasehu LaAbed Akum U'Mishamshecha V'Chol HaNas LeBishvila Shenemar Abed Te'abdu Neskol HaMekoymes. There's a mitzvah to get rid of avodah zarah. So, bottom line is the Rebbe presents this as an argument not to have a state. He's saying forget about the Shalosh Shvuos for a second. But if you have a state and you can't be ma'abed avodah zarah, then you're being over on avodah zarah. You're being over on this Isser. And the way Rav Ovadya Yosef presents it, it sounds like he's saying, okay, it's allowed to have a state. You just can't. Unfortunately, you can't do the mitzvah of getting rid of avodah zarah. So it's not Yad Yisrael Tekifa. So what is it then? What is it then?
So he doesn't mention
he's
that?
kind of like, he's leaving you hanging because he's saying like, it's you can't get rid of it, so you can't get rid of it. So okay, so too bad you can't get rid of it. So then don't have a state. What are you having a state for?
Does the Lubavitch Rebbe say something similar like that?
I don't know.
I think he said, yes, it is a violation of Shalosh Shavuos, but you can't get rid of it, I think. I read
So you can't get rid of the state, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different issue. What do you do about it now? I'm not discussing that. Anyway, we have only a little time left. Let's do the next page. It's this one that starts with the word ulam. Yeah, ulam. However, adayin yesh ladun b'masha kasav Rambam hilchos avodah zarah yud daled she'af bizman sheyad akum tekifa al Yisrael. Even in the time when the non-Jews are in power, which is nowadays, right? Ein moichrim karka legoy be'eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to sell land to a goy. Shneimar lo yisechanim. Don't let them have any place in the land. If they don't have land in Eretz Yisrael, yeshivas and yeshivas araihi. If they just come and they pass through, but they're at least there for a temporary period, they're not going to leave. They're not going to stay. If you sell them land, they're going to become more permanent. This Isser applies to any nation. So nobody disagrees. Nobody holds that this applies only to the 7 nations. Okay? Because of a Goin Baal Knesset Gedola, B'Sefer Dina Dechaya, She'af Das Rambam Kenhu. The Rambam also agrees it applies to any nation. V'chein pasuk B'Sefer
Dina Dechaya mean really?
It's the
living.
The laws of the living. It's just it's the name of a sefer. So So basically, there's another Ister besides Lo Yeshvu. Lo Yeshvu B'Artzecha we saw already. It only applies to Goyim, the seven nations, maybe. But this applies to every nation in the world, no matter whether they do Avodah Zarah or not. Okay? Okay, Ella. So what's going to be the heter then? If you're going to give over the territories to the Arabs, maybe you're going to be over on the Lo Yisachanim. So Dr. Rav Ovadya El Shamaran Harishon L'Tzion. The Rishon LeZion is the Sephardi chief rabbi of the Holy Land.
Rishon LeZion, of course, yeah.
Yeah, it goes back hundreds of years. So Gaon Yerushalayim.
Bashi?
Yeah, well, that was in any Arab country. It was called Chacham Bashi, I think, in Turkey. But here it's called the Rishon LeZion. So he says,
where's it? What's the place?
Second paragraph. Ella. Shemar na Rishon LeZion Gaon Yerushalayim Morenu Miyuchas Bechar Shmuel. This is Rebbe Fall Miyuchas. He was the Miyuchas family was a family of Sephardim that lived in the Middle East. They came from Spain. Their name was Miyuchas. They were they had good yichus. And his name was Rebbe Fall, and his father's name was Rebbe Shmuel, so he's called Rebbe Miyuchas Bechar Shmuel.
What is Bechar? Oh, the firstborn?
The firstborn of Shmuel, yeah, I think. Anyway, B'Sifroi Mizbeach Adama, in his sefer which is called Mizbeach Adama, Heid Begadloi. He says testimony. Shekama migdoyle Yisrael asu ma'isa limkor bateim v'chatzreiseim liyishmeelim. That great gedolim sold their land to the Muslims. Why? Mishum shesoivrim shaloi nesra chani bekarka el lagabi goyim sheoivdim avodah zarah. Because they hold that this issur only applies to people who do avodah zarah. Shen ken abi yishmeelim she'enim oivdim avodah zarah. Therefore, it's mutter. V'shekain muchach mimash kosav Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs v'zula shainai. The Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs says he siranu Hashem yisbarach milahoyshiv avodah zarah bi'artzeinu. He says that lo yisachanim is because of letting goyim live in Eretz Yisrael, but not just goyim who do avodah zarah. Kedei shelo nilmoid kfiroisam b'Hashem. We shouldn't learn from their denial of Hashem. Shenemar lo yeshvu bi'artzecha pen yachtiu oischali kisav Eloheim. V'mirtza akum lamoid bi'artzeinu oster lonu laharshlis lo yadshi yikabel alav shlo lavoid avodah zarah. Aval oivdei avodah zarah lo yeshvu imon bi'artzeinu v'lo nimkar lahem nachla. He brings in the issur to sell them, v'lo yinashki lahem buys to rent to them. Ubabir amru lanu apirish lo yisachanim lo yisitein lahem chaniyah bekarka. So you see the Rambam mixes together oivdei avodah zarah with lo yisachanim. So you see from this that really there's no issur to sell or rent land to an Arab in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? So that's his heter. So just to sum up, this is what he wants to say. Lo yisachanim doesn't apply to Yishmaelim, so therefore it should be allowed to give it to them. Now I just want to say that there's at least three other ways to be matir it. This is a common question. I've been asked this question. People write this question to me. What about lo yisachanim, right? And I brought in the Sefer HaChakaloi, near the end, this question of lo yisachanim. Yeah, that maybe yeah. Let's say forget about the territories. He's talking about giving the territories, but we say the whole state should be given back to the Palestinians. If the whole state should be given back to the Palestinians, what about lo yisachanim? The common question people ask. So first of all, you have what he says here that Yishmaelim don't apply to lo yisachanim. Yeah, but not all the Palestinians are Muslims. Some of them are Christians. So maybe you wouldn't have that teretz. But I think the answer is very simple. Lo yisachanim is not to sell land to them. If you give sovereignty on Eretz Yisrael to them, you're not selling land to them. No particular piece of land will now go and change ownership from a Jew to a Goy. We're not doing that. When we say give back the state to the Palestinians, we say they should be in control of the state. But not that any individual Jew should have to give up his land. If a Jew wants to give up his land, it's a separate story. That's nothing to do with the issue of having a Medina. A Jew could own land, right? We own land here in New York. There's no issue to own land. The issue is to have a sovereign state. So to give sovereignty to them is not lo yisachanim. Now the Zionists argue that it is because they say the Rambam says that it's because they should be there, Yeshivas Arai, they shouldn't be in a permanent way living in Eretz Yisrael. So on that's time of the Krah. You can't use that and invent a new Isser based on that. You can't say, oh yeah, the reason is because they shouldn't have a permanent living in Eretz Yisrael, so therefore let's expand it to include sovereignty. No, the issue is loisachanim. Don't give them land. Don't sell them land. Period. You can't make up new isurim. Okay, that's one. Secondly, when the Arabs want the land back, they're not coming and saying, "Sell us land." Let's say a Yid would steal a piece of land from an Arab, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what they did. They stole. They cleared out 500 villages and sent them into exile. So all those villages are now Jewish land, right? The Zionists took it over. It became state land. The JNF owned it for a while, and they gave it over to people, and people built cities on there, and that's it, right? So tons of cities in the Medina are built on top of Palestinian villages. So when they want the land back, is that lois echanim? If you steal something from a guy and then he wants it back, is that lois echanim? It's for sure not lois echanim. Lois echanim is to give them something. That's not, if I own something, I can't give it to them. But if it's theirs already and I just stole it from them, I'm for sure allowed to give it back to them. That's number two. Number three, if we're talking about giving back the Medina and making it a Palestinian state, well, the whole Medina is Aser. The Shalosh Shvu is Aser us to have a Medina. So how could you say that it's Aser to give it back because of Lois Echanim? So clearly, Lois Echanim doesn't play a role over here. Lois Echanim doesn't play a role over here. But besides that, you have what he says that it doesn't apply to Ishmael. All right, I guess we'll have to stop. Next time we'll talk about the next shtickle where he talks about the Shalosh Shvuos Beferish. You see, Rav Ovadya Yosef read Vayol Moshe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he quotes it. He actually quotes it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we'll see you next time. It's Hashem.
Who's